Today, I am joined by Kristine Steuart, the co-founder and former CEO of Allocadia and former board chair of BC Tax Board. Kristine, welcome. I am so thrilled to be joining you here. Now, as I said in the opening, you're the former CEO of Allocadia. So how has life changed?
Hey, Jill, and hey, everyone. And yes, feel free to put some questions in the chat panel. I've got it open here too as we go throughout the session. But yeah, I mean, it's still a little bit odd to hear the former CEO, but it's really great. I mean, the reason for doing this was a very good one. As you said, we've just gone through a big transaction with a goal of creating that next inflection point of growth. So when we were seeking that deep investment partner, we had a PE firm who wanted to bring us together with another company. And it's just an exciting time. We were seeing a bunch of momentum. And so it's nice to be in this zone, having sort of done my job as CEO to create kind of that next growth phase. And yeah, I'm just, and it was a natural progression for me to sort of cheer on that newly formed executive team as they continued to build. So it's been really fun just focusing on family, spending. I was sharing with my team and the company that I'm looking forward to being able to be a bit more present. I've had lots of fun thoughts over the years with Allocadia, busy thoughts. But yeah, just looking forward to kind of being more in the moment and seeing what the future holds.
No, it's exciting times. I can't wait to see what you do next. But
thanks. Yeah. Still TBD. That is in exploring mode. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And listen, you and I have a shared passion and maybe even frustration that we have 11,000 tech companies in BC, but only 2% of them get to that scale stage of having 100 employees or more. Now, you're one of the success stories. What was it that allowed you to scale?
Yeah, so sort of thinking about this session, of course, it's the ScaleUp Roundtable. So sort of reflecting on what were the key elements and pillars that got us to be able to do that and continue to grow. And I know Jill will probably dig into these pieces, but I boiled it down to kind of these 5 key pillars. And, first and foremost was really about driving strong customer value. Okay, everyone says they're going to be focused on the customer, but I think we did some really unique things there with Allocadia that perhaps we can dig into. Number 2 was we had a really large TAM and market that we could go after. I think that's really important when we think about scaling big tech companies, is that you have big global goals. We also had a strategic position in that market. So we were a category leader in what we did. And that was really critical for our growth over the years. And then finally, we had really strong operational discipline and metrics. So certainly when you do transactions, whether it's an investment round or of course at acquisition, which for us was still continued growth, that was the purpose of that. You have to have stellar metrics across the business. I'm talking in enterprise SaaS, but certainly for any business, whatever your metrics are. And then last but not least, that 5th key pillar, absolutely the foundation to everything, is a really strong team. So I really anchor that our team was really strong at delivering that customer value and that proven customer value. And we were set up to always go for that next phase of growth. There was sort of a constant evolution and change with the team. So I know that's a lot we could dig into those different pieces as we go, but if I really tried to take a step back and think about what got us to scale, it would be those 5 pillars.
That's awesome. And I've just dropped those 5 points in
great.
the chat so people have it as reference. Let's go through them one by one.
Perfect.
This is so closely aligned to the content of our accelerator programs. It's a proven way to succeed. So let's unpack them one by one with you. Okay, so talk first about customers, that customer focus, customer value. Why is that so critical?
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, I guess what I would share with this group is that, focusing on that customer value metric that ultimately sort of proves or tells you that you are delivering strong value is just core, a core focus area. Obviously, in enterprise SaaS, that's gross retention, net retention, and we were just laser focused on that. Allocadia had a super strong 94% gross retention, close to 115% net retention over the last 12 months, which is just amazing. So certainly that helps you as you go, if your path is to go on investors and with VCs, et cetera. But how we delivered that, I think, are a few key pillars. I would say that kind of our culture at Allocadia was really a co-creation mentality with our customers. So Jill, you mentioned I co-founded Allocadia with my twin sister, Catherine, and we bootstrapped the business to $1 million in sales by bringing on some amazing early big brand name customers like Red Hat and VMware and Dell and companies like that. And when you're creating in a new market and in a new category, I mean, listening to your customer, working with them, but like deeply engaging with them and getting their feedback is critical. We were also, from the customer front, I think over the years, very good with aligning with our executive buyer. So in our case, the chief marketing officer. I've seen lots of companies and tech companies where you sort of shy away. You might work with your kind of purchaser of the software, but that's not always who's signing and who's the ultimate buyer, and their value criteria, what their business pains are and their benefits are of your software can obviously be very different from the people you might be talking about on a sort of day-to-day basis. And I think, we always sort of have this frame too of like guiding our customer, right? Charting their path. I think, especially in enterprise SaaS, I think that's a big evolution today, is you have to help be really prescriptive with your software. And that's even moving into a trend of product-led growth where the product is really guiding the customer. And I think if you are in enterprise SaaS, I would definitely recommend looking at those types of macro trends and sort of software delivery and how you think about delivering value to your customers over time. So those are kind of some key anchors on the customer side we did to get those, really strong customer metrics.
I think that's really insightful. You've made some points there that we haven't heard before that I know is going to be valuable to the SaaS startups in the room. Now, this is something that I'm obsessed by, but you talked about large markets, right? If you want to build a scale-up success, if you want to build a globally competitive business, you've got to be focused on big enough markets, big enough problems, not small problems. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So from day one with Allocadia, we always wanted to be the best at what we did in the world. And over the years, I've met with tech companies in town, and sometimes there's sort of this focus on kind of smaller markets or a smaller size of market opportunity. And there's sort of the difference between your ultimate goal of the large TAM, but then how you focus and execute on a specific part of that market. I think your overall company strategy has to have that big market and opportunity in mind. Then you can go and focus deep in a certain area of it, go see that success, build from that, and then expand from there. But it really has to be sort of that kind of dual orientation. And I do find, I think sort of sometimes, this Canadian mentality, it's kind of like, let's go big on these things. Let's feel confident that we can actually be the best in the world at what we do, and then go create with that mindset. And, especially if you're going to be talking to VCs, I'll throw out some numbers there, and, they are looking for numbers. It's a bit of the path we take when we work with investors, but Allocadia, we had a, $5 billion TAM growing to 10 billion. So there was also a lot of macro market. For us, it was the transformation of work. There was a lot of software and technologies that helped different departments within companies work. So if you think the CRM system for sales, that's a very internal operational system. The ERP system for finance, internal operational. But for marketing, there was nothing that existed on that. And marketing software was really focused on customer execution, executing email, social, digital, which they had to figure out. But we were really riding that macro trend of how it worked. And of course, COVID really accelerated that. So these are the types of things that especially investors are going to be looking for if they want to fund your idea. But certainly it allows you to build a big company with a big market and global presence.
That's great. And then I guess the next one actually follows on really clearly. So strong customer focus, tackle a large enough market.
Yep.
And then the goal, and people often describe it as almost impossible, is to achieve category leadership.
Yeah.
You did it.
Yeah.
So tell us how you did it.
Yeah. So, gosh, it's such a big topic to talk about, category creation. Everyone says it's so hard and it takes so much money and, time and effort. Allocadia, so we only raised 30 million over our lifetime, which is a fairly small number in the grand scheme these days, especially with all the money that's getting put into companies. And we've seen other companies raise 200, 300 million to get to where we were. So I'm also just a firm believer that you don't necessarily have to go do growth at all costs and raise all sorts of money to go create a category and invent something new that people don't have or exist today. And I do come back to, again, just that deep customer focus. We had some of the most amazing CMO leaders, amazing companies, advocating, using our software, seeing really strong business value. And ultimately, we were able to create that category. So we did have a legacy analyst category that we really shaped and transformed. We kind of moved it from budgeting and financial management to the way marketers work and their operations and their planning and, they're measuring business impact. So, part of that is shifting and changing the language of that category and redefining it to make it work for you and you become the leader in that category. So yeah, and I think for us also from a category perspective, there was lots of vendors, lots of people in MarTech focused on the customer side, execution side, like channels, but we had a real big white space in that operational side. And it just really allowed us to kind of flourish and lead in that space.
That's really great. Listen, you've talked about it a lot already and yet it's so rare that people talk about it. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's so important to be grounded in data.
Yeah.
Right? It's just, and I know that operational discipline you mentioned off the top was absolutely key. So blind us with the kind of data and metrics that you found critical to stay on top of to drive your success.
Yeah. I think when I had my company meeting sharing lessons learned with my team, I think I had a little image. It's like, let's do a team building session looking at data. And anyways, I think there is a way to make data fun and part of sort of what you do day in, day out. And I do think that smart people in a company need that context and need that understanding of where you are in a business and where you need to go. I think there's definitely an exercise involved where you don't want to overwhelm the team and company with data. That gets boring, it gets messy. But how do you make it memorable? How do you make it an experience as they look through that data and something that they can use to tie back to their job specifically and how they make an impact in the business? But yeah, we've always been run by metrics. We had a big spreadsheet every board meeting. We tracked all the key SaaS metrics from obviously customer retention, like I was saying, to growth. We've operated near cash positive almost our whole lifespan of the company, which is obviously very unique and rare in the tech world. So we would track that. We would track sales and marketing productivity metrics. So if it's an enterprise SaaS, you're definitely wanting to know your sales productivity and ramp time, and how you're going to scale up that sales team, et cetera. Where do you want to get to? Where are you not strong, et cetera. And when we've done investment rounds, and certainly at the last transaction, positioning and making sure that all pieces of your business from a metric standpoint look good and healthy, and prove that what you're doing is delivering customer value is just critical as you build your business to scale.
It's so interesting. I like to say to people, don't be scared of the data.
Yeah.
Data is your friend. It will help you succeed, but you have to look at it, right?
You have to look at it. And I am, surprised at just how many, especially in starting off and companies starting off, it's like, map it out. What are your what's LTV? How much will it cost you to acquire? And you've got to have a core understanding of that as you launch the business.
Well, before I go to my next question, I'm just going to let my audience into a little secret, which is that BC Tech will be launching a mentorship matchmaking program soon. And Kristine has volunteered to be one of the mentors in our pilot. So if you would like to access more of this incredible wisdom for yourself, keep an eye out for that on launch. We'd be happy to see an application from you. Now, the final pillar that you talked about, Kristine, was culture and people and leadership. So how did you build the culture and nurture it over time as you grew and you became a much larger business?
Yeah, I mean, culture inside of any company, I think, and certainly in a tech company, will evolve and constantly change over time. And I think investing in different pieces in your team at certain times will be important and critical, and then you have to shift and change that. That's part of what I think makes creating a strong kind of company culture so hard, is that you just have to keep adjusting and investing in it. But when I anchor on company culture, I anchor on the best advice I ever received as CEO was from one of my board members, Nanon. She told me that my job as CEO was to create a company that people wanted to belong to. And when she said people, she meant customers, employees, investors, stakeholders, partners, the whole range of stakeholders you have in your business. And that's a very intuitive concept to say, oh, that makes sense. Yes, you want people to belong, I think, and feel like they belong, and they stay, and they're working hard, and we're all sort of rowing in the same direction, et cetera. But of course, the hard part is, well, how do you do that? And the answer is that it's every decision, every action, every experience that you do with your team, which is, again, what makes it so difficult. And so because it's so broad, I think you have to anchor on a few key pillars that matter for you and your company and your team and your stage to build the culture that you want. And it's certainly overt actions that you do to create that, because you don't want to let your company and culture sort of create itself, so to speak. And I think with Allocadia, we had a few key pillars. One of them that I think really stayed throughout the years was the concept of just career opportunities and career evolution and experience. And I think a lot of companies anchor on that. That was certainly what made me feel like I belonged in my, when I started my career in tech, was job promotions and increased responsibility and recognition for the work I was putting into the business. And we really tried to focus on that at Allocadia. And certainly at this last and next transaction, a whole bunch of new career opportunities. A few of the Allocadia execs are now leading the combined company organizations, huge opportunities as they go forward. So that was a big one. I think another one I really tried to anchor on, and your previous ScaleUp guest, Lori Schultz, She was our board member. I learned so much from her, but she really anchored her company on the one-page strategy. And I learned that from her years and years ago. We would do a quarterly breakfast, and I took that idea and ran with it, and we've always anchored on that. So I also think the team knowing how what they do contributes to the overall strategy, how they're making an impact in the business, is a super important part. And then making it an experience. We used to do, this was before COVID, of course, these sort of theater sessions and we'd have the team co-present parts and different strategy evolutions that we wanted to go through, because the hard part is having the team remember what that strategy is and sort of make it fun and meaningful. But we'd really anchor on company strategy. And I think that the third piece, because like I said, there's so many decisions you can make building culture, was we really tried to, I think, create a culture that was sort of like embrace your whole self. I think my sister and co-founder Catherine was always really big on that. And when she'd do company meetings, it was just, how can we bring in sort of the creativity of the team and what makes each person unique, and just really embrace that as you go forward, for people to feel comfortable. And I think it's a bit of a link in women in leadership too, and bringing that confidence to women in the business too, but just sort of embracing the whole self. Anyways, those were some of the key, because there's lots of things we did over time and lots of things shifted. Like we used to have a differentiator on flexible work. People want to move to Kelowna or the Sunshine Coast or work from South America. We were like, absolutely. But of course, that's not a differentiator anymore. So you have to shift. Yeah.
Oh, it's inspiring, really. Now, there was something that we talked about when we were preparing for this that I was really, really taken by it. And you were saying that in addition to the culture, there's also, as a leader and for the company as a whole, you have to have the right mindset.
Yes.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Tell us what you mean by mindset and what your mindset was.
Yeah. I mean, I look at this as sort of my leadership philosophy, I guess, and approach is that there's kind of two pieces. It's all the skill sets that you have to learn as a leader. And I do think you have to learn and study and analyze what worked and didn't and keep improving as a leader. But then there's also mindset, which is like half the battle, I think, in terms of just having the right approach to challenges, opportunities. One of the things the executive team and I would talk about is, nothing big comes easy. Like you gotta play the long game when you're building a company and stick out those really hard times. Those can be such rich moments of learning and sort of bonding as a team, and seeing what it really means to kind of get through and build, because there's no way around it. You're gonna have those moments, and it's a matter of telling yourself, well, what do I choose to be a part of? What am I okay with on the hard parts or the challenging parts? And do I just sort of punch through this and keep participating? So, playing the long game, having a good mindset to challenge. And then I also often say with leaders, I think it's okay to talk about that there's like a winning mindset and approach, right? I think this is a bit of like our competitive, create big companies that scale with big global goals. You are in a game and something you want to win in. So what are your strategies? How are you going to execute against that? And it doesn't have to be a sort of battle per se. You could think of it as sort of a sports game or something. But I do think it's really important to talk about just how you become the best at what you do, and really embrace that in the sort of mindset.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Now, look, we've got a fascinating question in the chat that I'm pretty confident you'll be able to speak to. So just reading it out here. Wondering about your thoughts on when to be careful, maybe even reject opportunities for your company and growth when offered investment, especially when being offered to be a subsidiary of a much larger company. So presumably, along the way, in the 11 years you were building Allocadia, you turned down opportunities. And how did you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I really boil this down to company strategy and ultimately what you're trying to do, and go capture, bigger TAM, go capture more expansion from your customers. And there's always choices and paths at that point. We had a couple of exit opportunities along the way that we said no to, or different funding rounds, et cetera. And I think, I mean, I always anchored my strategy on that customer focus. And you want to be thoughtful around going deep into the core of what you do and what's really that you can be the best at, and be thoughtful around when you want to expand, right, to larger parts of the market and a broader suite. For us, that's what this last transaction allowed us to do, was a super complementary company and product that then expanded our geographic reach, our suite of products, a global team around the world. And it was the right time to go do that then. It was probably, right, if we would have tried to do that earlier, especially with our funding profile, would have been probably more difficult to do that. So at this stage in the game, I thought, okay, the broader suite is time, and it's time to go have a PE. They're putting a bunch of money on the balance sheet, and it was just time to do that expansion in our market. So there are choices and balances of when you say yes to things and when you say no to things, and that's all part, a bit of like that game I said, a bit of the chess game of where you pick and choose. So I hope that answers the question.
That's great. So I might just go to another angle on that question. So this question was very specific to, turning down opportunities for investment or to be acquired. There's so many other strategic decisions that can be really, really tough. And we talked about how strategy is about what you don't do.
Yeah.
In many ways, rather than what you do. So, but those are tough decisions to decide not to expand or not to grow or not to tackle a market. So can you maybe tell us a bit about some of those other tough strategic decisions you had to make over the years?
Yeah, and what you just made me think of as you were saying that is also how you make those decisions inside of your company. And I really think I always treated my executive team as big joint partners in co-creating that company strategy, together. I sort of looked at my role as CEO as kind of the advocate of the process, and making sure it's clear, and making sure we have that strategy and it's clear what we're saying no to and yes to, obviously being a huge contributor to that strategy. And if we have differences of opinions on the strategy, then you have to make a call and make those decisions as you go. But I think that the most difficult ones was that balance between being focused and making sure you're the best at that, but making sure that's not too small of a market opportunity or too small of a value equation for your customer, but then also going after that larger TAM and expanding that. And I think that's a fine line that you walk. And we would also include the team in there. I know, Jill, you and I talked a bit about my leadership philosophies, but there's the concept too of top down and bottoms up, and where do you lean? But I think there's different times for everything, but we would definitely get the input of the team also in terms of where we wanted to go for the company strategy.
That's excellent. Well, I can see the connection between having the one-page strategy approach, having everybody in the company understand it, and then that gives you a wider group of people to consult about decisions, and they can meaningfully participate. It's really helpful. Now, the theme of balance has come up a lot. You've used that word several times in this conversation, and we talked, the phrase you used when we were talking earlier was yin and yang.
Yes.
So tell us about the different yins and yangs.
So that comes a little bit, I think, from the identical twin concept. I think I've heard over the years that people say good business partners are when you can't do it without each other, right? You have complementary skill sets. The whole is sort of greater than the parts. And that was, even though we're twins, we don't actually do the same things. We were very complementary. I would early days focus on the sales and marketing side, and she was coding and the technical side. And ironically, it kind of flipped over the years. She helped engage with some of our biggest customers in sales, and I was deeper into product strategy. So that's really swapped around over the years. But yeah, I sort of use that as an anchor for my leadership philosophy, which is we tend to think of leadership and talk about it in kind of right and wrongs, right? So for example, you need to be, as a CEO or a member of an exec team, more strategic versus execution, or you have to be, are they a visionary versus operational? And I tend to look at it like that these are factors that are more, you have to find the balance between those. So for example, on the strategic and execution, you kind of have to know as a leader when it's time to be more on the strategy side, but you also have to know how to bring that to reality and how to be a good execution person and see that through your team. And to me, that's what makes leadership so hard, is that it's all about context. It's like, well, when is it time to do a strategy side or a vision side? When is it time to be really operational or focus on the execution? And the answer is that it's both. And you just have to figure out when. There was this great HBR article, I would recommend it for people to read, just came out in their January, February issue. I think the title is, Setting Your Exec Team for the Future or something like that. And they labeled these terms, and it was so great. I have it written down here. Like, one of them was, they sort of call it these paradoxical leadership traits that you have to go hand in hand. And, unfortunately or sadly, what they also learned through this is that team members think that their leaders are having a harder and harder time balancing these traits. And this is all happening during a time when employees and team members expect a lot from their leaders, as they should, right? We need to be doing a lot for our team members, for our companies, for strategy, et cetera. So this HBR article, yeah, strategic executor, right? Being bold, big, ambitious ideas, but knowing how to bring it down. The humble hero. So knowing when to be decisive and sort of the hero side and making fast decisions, but also listening to your team and admitting when you have mistakes and, bringing in their point of view. Or another one was the globally minded localist. I love that, especially as we go through all of these remote teams. How do you think about communities in person and different, offices, and when we go back, but you're also a global team, and what does it mean to engage in that and have that experience across a whole global team, all remote? And it's just what makes leadership really, really hard. That's why, even with my team, I was encouraging them to go study up on that, go learn about that. You make decisions, analyze them, right? Try and get better at your decisions if you're not happy with how something ended up, et cetera. And it's just a constant learning process.
That's awesome. And Erica has dropped the link to that article in the chat.
Oh, great. Good.
I
Yeah.
bookmarked it for myself. So
Perfect. It's a good read. I really liked it. It made a ton of sense to me because it embraces the, let's call it the ambiguity of leadership versus you have to be like this or like that. It's not a black and white thing.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So my final question before I see if there's any other questions in the chat, just a reminder, please don't hesitate to raise your questions. And this is something, again, you and I have talked about a few times over the years. There's quite different expectations of women leaders. How did you navigate that?
Yeah, this topic, Jill, you and I have had lots of conversations about this, I think, over the years now. But yeah, where I anchor on that is I anchor on these leadership philosophies and mindset and what I was sharing about the team. They do have high expectations of the leaders as they should, right? And boards have to hold CEOs accountable. There's bad actors out there. They need to be kind of, filtered out, and that's where the board has to make some hard but strong and good decisions for the team and the company. But ultimately, I look at male or female, you do have to get better at leadership. You have to learn, you have to think about what it means to be a good leader. And where it really does come in for women, and I'll specifically talk about one area around, especially as you're raising money, especially in the tech world. And there's been some studies on this. There's been studies around like the pitch competitions, or studies on showing presentations by changing the name, male, female. And when females are up on stage or someone's reading their presentation, they're sort of asking more risk questions, more challenge questions on the business. Whereas with their male counterparts, they're asking more opportunity questions and vision questions. And there's definitely a gender bias at play, I think, not just with that stakeholder group, but with many stakeholder groups when you look at women leaders. And that's certainly been my experience. It's to say, though, that is something to be knowledgeable about. I think it's very real, but you can go and act on that, right? You can, so for example, on that, visionary risk, but you can turn the question around to, yes, answer the risk question, but get really good at practicing and telling your story from a vision perspective. And that's where it ties into the large TAM and the category leadership and the big goals, et cetera. And, or just, right, if there is that perception around you're on the more operational side, talking about your strategic and strategy one pager, et cetera. So there are those things at play, but I do think you can address them as a leader. And I also told my team, I said, they have a very unique experience. They've had only 2% of VC funding goes to female-only led companies. That has remained the same over the last 10 years. So every year it's around 2%, which is frustrating because it should be more. And I think I read a stat that only 5% of Canadian tech companies have a woman CEO. So we saw Lori Schultz a few weeks ago. So I also share with the team, you have a super unique experience, take that, learn that, analyze why do you think, how did we do things that was perhaps a bit differently than what you're experiencing now or at other companies, and take that back into your leadership, take that back into your team, and write it down, talk to your manager about that, and bring that into the company. So I just encourage them to embrace their own leadership style too, embrace their whole self, and then go forward on that.
Wonderful. I really loved a couple of really clear what works, actionable strategies there, right? So be aware of the data, be aware of the biases, and then you can actually adapt your own vocabulary, what you talk about, how you answer things. Maybe use more vision words, use them more frequently, even than feels normal, because you know that you're pushing against that headwind. So I think that's really helpful. And then learn from those who have, right? So last time on ScaleUp Roundtable, Lori Schultz. Today, you. Next time it'll be Christy Wyatt of Absolute Software, who worked once in Silicon Valley for Steve Jobs. So I'm really interested in that conversation. So now let me just, I've got one question in the chat. Let us know if you have any others. We'll cover that. And then I have one final question for you, Kristine. So Erica's saying that's a great article, but she'd love to know if you have a favorite business book or other recommendations for us.
Yeah, I mean, the one that comes to mind, this was again the same board member I spoke about earlier. She had recommended this on setting company strategy, because I said, well, CEO's in charge of that. Like, what exactly does that mean? Like, how do we actually really write that down and define it? And it's called Playing to Win. It's an older book, but it just has a really nice, simple framework in there. It's told in a business story, but it's a simple framework, some core fundamentals around setting strategy, like where you play, how you win, what capabilities need to be in place, what team do you have to have in place, et cetera. So I just found it a really helpful framework, and I use that to map my one-pager company strategy against. So that's one that comes to mind. And I'm a big fan of any sort of leadership, real life leadership adventure sort of story. So told through the experiences. So I'm thinking of, there's a bunch of them out there like that, but to me, I learn a ton from reading those types of books.
That's awesome. Thank you. So I've got a final question from Scott. Hi, Kristine. On the operational thread regarding your revenue business model and SaaS in particular, did you have to make many decisions on the evolution of that model, and how did you weigh those decisions?
For us, it was always, that's one thing we kind of anchored on at Allocadia, that we were always kind of true enterprise SaaS, and we never did a business model where we had to customize, configure, different versions of software for different customers. When you ask about business model, that's sort of where my brain goes to, because I have seen in the past a lot of VC and tech and companies in general that to get that big client, they'll customize, and then there's a whole bunch of costs involved with maintaining that, and then value comes into question and how you repeat that value across your customer base. So we never really had to shift anything fundamental. I do think there was some shifts from an enterprise and mid-market focus, for example, and the weight we would put into that. Or we started very deeply, which was good, in B2B tech companies, but then we moved to increase that TAM into B2C, and we were signing up some really good, strong B2C companies. So there was definitely a shift. I'll call that from more just go-to-market elements, and it was specifically around increasing that TAM and market opportunity and kind of learning from those new customers. So and again, I would use that. How did we do that? That's where my executive team, we'd come together to make some of those choices as we went forward.
That's awesome. Listen, Kristine, this has been absolutely wonderful. Really appreciated all of your thoughts and insights. Let's leave the last word to you. Do you have any final words of advice for our audience?
Yeah, so this is a scale up group, so I'm assuming people want to sort of anchor on how to scale up. I guess I would say, if it's a little bit of the mindset and perseverance and that customer value. So if you are seeing that customer value, and if you're early on and you've got a few customers and they love your software and they want to refer and recommend it, again, I'm talking software, but that could be any type of product, then just anchor on that as a founder, and because you'll get the setbacks, you'll get the people leaving, you'll get the churn in the customer base. Don't want too much of that, obviously, but to just continue on that path as an anchor, because you will have the ups and downs. And Jill knows this is the work I do with Jill and BC Tech. I absolutely want to see BC Tech grow, tech in Canada grow. And I really, even just before this call, I was with the Friends University, their daughter, and she was taking an entrepreneur course, and just encouraging people to go on that adventure if that's something that they want to do. It's full of learnings, it's tough work, it's hard work, but it can be extremely rewarding from so many different perspectives. So it's more just, I guess, motivation to go for it.
I love it. Okay, go for it. Create your own. I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Kristine. This has been fantastic.
Yeah.